Okay, so in our last episode, there was a little moment there where I don't know if it's quite breaking the fourth wall, Gary, but I definitely left this realm of professionalism and I kind of tapped into being your friend and personally maybe getting a little defensive. Do you remember that moment I'm talking about?
I do, and I don't. You would have to explain to me the fourth wall a little bit, but so whether you broke it or not, I don't know because I've never heard that term before.
Okay, so if you're at a theater and there's a show you're watching, it's when like an actor in the show stops doing the show and directly looks to the audience, And now I'm just talking to you. I'm ignoring what's going on with Gary and the whole show. And then I immediately come back to the show.
So like a character pauses and comes out of character.
Yes, exactly.
Because you know what? I'm a big fan of the movie We're the Millers.
Oh,
Have you
love
seen that?
Well, I have to because I became friends with you and you're obsessed with that
And
movie.
there was a couple times when Jason Sudeikis,
love him,
and we do because we like
Ted Lasso.
We like Ted Lasso.
We do.
It's funny the different paths we're heading down. And then Jennifer Aniston come out of character.
Yes.
And they look at the camera.
Right.
So that's the fourth wall.
Right.
See,
they do that in The Office. They do that in Parks and Rec. Yeah. So I kind of did that for a second because you were talking about how if you when you worked in law enforcement, if you ever got a call from a parent, hey, my kid is missing, the first place you're going to look is the house. And for a second, I'm in journalism Melissa mode, but then I immediately kind of got annoyed with you because I thought, Gary, if I'm calling you, I don't want to know that you're going to be coming to my house. And I just felt like we needed to unpack that a quick second, if you don't mind, because I think that it actually speaks to a generalization of more people and maybe misconceptions we have about law enforcement and responding to things. And that is, in my mind, if I call you, don't make fun of me.
No,
I can feel it. If I call you and I say, hey, my kid is missing, I'm expecting, maybe a couple commercial breaks later, you're going to find him in an hour. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do.
You watch enough cop shows and they always solve the crime in about an hour to an hour and a half. It's amazing. Even in a 2-part series, you're talking about 3 hours tops. But that's not the reality. Even though we know that as you and I are talking about it, I think the average person, when you hear about a crime happening, they sort of expect you guys to come in, figure it out, and solve it, and get home for dinner. You know what I mean?
And that's where most people get their perception from.
Right.
And even in these new crime shows or the Ted Lasso episodes where people binge watch, we're binge watching because we want to really get to the end.
Right.
And it's like we don't have the patience for it because we're so used to being programmed to do that.
Right.
And so the TV concept of crime and how crimes are solved and really how they're reported and the entirety of TV cop shows versus reality can really muddy the water because you were like, and not only that, well, so to be fair though, you are in the news, so you cover this and you cover cases. And so you really, I would say that your quasi public safety, law enforcement knowledge is there because you're covering so much of it and you cover it even in your news broadcasting days. Maybe not necessarily with me, but with others where you would really understand crimes. So your knowledge is a lot better in how some of the discussions that we had. But you did, for your term, break the fourth wall when you all of a sudden said, wait a minute, we went from calling the police to saying, wait a minute, if I call you, Gary, and you show up at my house, you're going to be mad. You did.
But it's true. And honestly, I think you're giving credit where you shouldn't, because I even think that's actually made it to another extreme being a journalist, because we show up and how many times do you get to the yellow tape and I'm asking questions that you're very kind about it. And honestly, a lot of cops are, but where I'm asking the same question 6 times, hoping that I'm going to catch you or have you say a different answer. But ultimately, you just don't have the answers yet. And we're not good with that. We're not. I mean, here's the thing is just in general, we live in a society where we need to have instant gratification, right? And especially when you're talking about urgency, or I need to know that somebody is safe, or I need to know that a crime has been solved, or you caught the bad guy.
Right.
We don't give that time. And I think that's a hard thing to grasp. And I think television and movies only make that perception harder.
For all of us, including you as a reporter or a journalist, because people are expecting the answers based upon what they see on the television.
Well, and the way that it's even perceived at crime scenes. So, for example, I don't know if this is kind of like a CSI Effect or if it's just from watching cop shows for as long as we have, or movies or whatever, but it just seems so obvious. So you and I were talking about a case in Enfield, Connecticut. maybe a couple of weeks back on my show, and I was asking you questions about, well, how in the world could the investigators have missed this? It had to do with Benadryl.
Yes,
okay,
yes,
are we
yes,
back on track?
Yes. Yeah, there
so
you go. Yep.
I'm interviewing Gary on my show, and I'm saying to him, okay, but it could be this. Okay, but what about this? How in the world could investigators have missed this? What do they even go back and look for at this point? And I think ultimately you're like, these are all great questions, but we don't know. And that's just not how it works. You have to give the process time. You have to give investigators that time. You don't want to compromise an investigation. But we do, to some degree, have this perception in our head that I'm going to show up to a house. It's going to be super clear. Here's the murder weapon. Here's the evidence. Here's what it is. How do you not have this wrapped up in 50 minutes tops? I'm serious. I do think that that's a common misconception.
Well, because they go to the default. And your default, or a lot of people's default, am I saying that the right way?
Default. It's okay. Yeah, don't worry.
I think it's coming out right, but it's sounding weird to me.
That's okay.
I think
it's because I'm putting you on the spot again. I'm doing this.
We go to our default, and if you're not in law enforcement and you don't understand law enforcement, and so real quickly before we even get to that, that's why recruiting is so important in law enforcement and the challenges of recruiting, because if people watch shows and they want to be a police officer, some of these shows are really exciting. Mm-hmm. Like I go back to some SWAT shows and some movies on SWAT. Well, if you look at that, your adrenaline is up. You want to be in that world. Mm-hmm. So if you're going into law enforcement thinking that's what it is, well, the reality is, yes, it's exciting, it's fun, the adrenaline pump and all that. But for the majority of the time, it's not that. It's the humdrum things that really matter to people that are not the excitement, not the car chases and stuff. So, but people will go back to what they know. If they're not getting information, and even sometimes if they are getting information, they still go back to their point of reference, which is oftentimes television these days.
I mean, and here's the thing, is even as a former television anchor and reporter, they're as funny as the movie is, and I do enjoy it. After a while, I couldn't stand Anchorman with Will Ferrell.
Yeah.
Because it was the same perception of, whatever we read on the teleprompter, we don't write them. We're kind of ding-dongs. And it was, so I only know from that little sliver. We don't do an awful lot on, I feel like, television and news reporting. They're starting to get a little bit, I'd say, better about it. But I do think that especially law enforcement, doctors too. I have to imagine doctors have that frustration of the Grey's Anatomies of the world and all of that. But just this kind of perception we have of television must mirror real life. And that's not always necessarily true. What would you say is kind of the CSI effect that the average person sort of goes through if they do indulge in these types of TV shows and movies?
Well, I think probably the easiest one to say that the misconception is really around DNA and crime scenes. When you start talking CSI, there's a couple things that matter. First of all, in any television show, there's like one main investigator.
Right.
And we've become accustomed to that. And that one main investigator, or maybe even two, it's like partners that are out there investigating it. And they're doing all the work and they're following up all the leads. And I think that's one misconception, that it's solved by one or two people, and it's not.
Right. I was going to say the FBI came on my show recently, and they completely debunked that. The idea of we come in, and now we don't need the state police, and we don't need the municipal police. We don't need anybody. We do it by ourselves. They're like, absolutely not. That's
it's one special agent's going to come in, and they're going to solve it. And
that's special agent Shamalama Ding Dong.
That's right. And that's not the case. It's a lot of the... so that's the one thing. And then the other thing is the way in which evidence is processed and the way in which information from the evidence is gathered. A lot of that might be good. There might be some good in some of these television shows, but really the CSI effect is saying that, number one, and you've talked about it before, it's solved in an hour with commercial breaks.
Yes.
The crime happens, the crime is investigated, the person confesses, and they're done, and then the show's over waiting for their next crime.
Right.
It doesn't happen that way. So the forensic analysis of it is a misconception. The way in which crimes are solved and worked by one person is a misconception. Some of the interviewing is a misconception.
How so?
Well, like how the interviews are done and how they set them up for interviews. The way in which interviews are conducted, it takes a lot of effort and work. A lot of background work goes into it. A lot of it, similar to what you would do in the media, is you take time to understand the issues and then you listen. It's important to listen to what people say. And it takes a lot of effort to to get a confession if you are going to get a confession.
That does seem so much easier. And this sounds so dumb as I say it out loud, but it does seem so much easier on television to either find the person of interest or to get the confession. I mean, and again, I understand you're dealing with a prime time, 1 hour. You got to get it, wrapped up with a bow on top. But even that, because we've had conversations in the past, Gary, where I don't understand a plea deal. I don't understand why you have to make plea deals, but sometimes you have to. I've in the past not understood why police departments will sometimes broker deals with people who can give them tips or are insiders. I'm missing it. What is it called?
Cooperators or
Yep. Nope. But
snitches.
what's that fund? What's not snitches?
Oh,
what's the
get stitches?
Not unless they're helping you solve crimes. But what's the
confidential informant fund?
Yes, there it is. See, I knew you'd land the plane.
Yes.
Whew, I'm telling you. It's true. But I've not understood those roles before. And I think, again, if you're just tuning in, we're talking about kind of TV. Does it really mirror reality, especially when you're talking about crime shows? And I think that, too, is sort of we have that not entirely correct. I'd say probably not correct at all, quite frankly, because I think we have this idea of if I come in and I have this intimidation factor and I catch you in a lie, well, then there's your confession. Bing, bang, boom. We got it. Adios. It just doesn't work that way.
Or the camera's on and then somebody else goes, it's my turn. Let me go in there and I'll go in there and I'll solve it.
Wait. Now, see, we're going to break the fourth wall. Ready? We're all going to do this together. Are you okay? Okay. Are you ready? So I want to know your top pet peeves when you're watching a cop show. We've never talked about this, and you didn't prepare for this. It's not in his notes, ladies and gents. We're breaking the fourth wall. Look at this, Gary. We'll do it together. Ready? We're going to talk to you right now, and we're going to break the fourth wall.
I got to be quite honest with you. I think that
what would you say are your top
This question from Melissa
pet peeves?
Is actually
it's really throwing you.
It's unplanned.
It is unplanned.
And while I delay, I'm going to try to think of an answer.
No, come on. When you're just watching a show, you're watching a show. You've been doing this for 30 plus years, and you're like, that's not right. Come on now.
I think a lot of it has to do with process and procedure. It's going to sound so dry, but I don't mean it like that. But I think that the way in which investigators approach things, the way, the power of emotional intelligence from police officers, and they don't do it justice. They kind of blanket over it all. Like somehow the characters become so skilled in law enforcement, but it's all planned.
Right.
And really all those investigations and efforts and the way they look at things requires a lot of work.
Right.
And somehow they never touch on that aspect of it. There are a lot of things. Like I'll look at a movie and I look at some of the hostage negotiation stuff. Having a background in hostage negotiations, I look at some of the way in which they perceive negotiations to go and what they're doing with them. And it's not real. It's because it takes a lot of effort.
Not what happens.
It's just not what happens.
You did not to jump around, but just speaking of that, just to give people context, you did a hostage negotiation at a local college here in Connecticut. This was years ago.
Yeah.
How long was that process? Because you told me this story, and just you telling the story, the footnotes version took you a solid 45 minutes. Not saying that in a mean way, but because it was such a long process. Wasn't that? How many hours did it take?
Over 8 hours.
That's what I thought. It was it was a full day.
And there's not a break. So you talk about a pet peeve. It's like there was no commercials. Like, okay, everybody relax for a second. We'll come back after the commercial break.
Right.
And we should at some point talk through that because it'll be interesting to talk through the concepts of that. Because there are a lot of shows about hostage negotiations.
That's so true.
But I think that's the pet peeve the most. Now I'm going to start writing down, and we'll each week if we go, we talk about it. Okay. No, I'm not saying for this time, but I'm saying for like future stuff of like as we watch shows. I'm going to break the fourth
wall. As you could see, this is Gary getting frustrated with me, but we're going to continue the conversation. We're talking about TV mirroring reality. Does it really? Isn't that cool? See, now you're going to do it all the time.
I am.
Isn't that fun?
Fourth wall.
Right? You're going to break the fourth wall. Although don't do it when we're not on microphone because that's just you talking to nobody.
Right. We'll be somewhere.
If we're walking around and you're like, I'm going to break the fourth wall. It's like, nope, Gary, it's just the two of us.
It will go back to what we talked about before we started filming is that I'm looking at someone but talking to Melissa. So maybe at some point I will break the fourth wall while we're walking.
That's actually an insane problem. We're working on our social skills here. We are. But going back to this. So okay, so your one pet peeve is that they just don't do that justice as far as like what those processes
Well, there's
like.
A lot of them. I mean, it's hard to in one show. It's hard to kind of pick them out unless I'm really thinking about it. But I do think that this concept that TV affects the way in which police do their job, not that the way they do their job, the way that people perceive them doing their job matters because it can affect a lot of people. And we kind of talked through a little bit of it. It will affect jurors if you think about it from a that people oftentimes don't think about. But if you're on a jury and I'm presenting evidence or I'm presenting DNA evidence or something, you are coming to it with a background. The questions to a juror are, do you have any knowledge of the case? Do you have any experience in law enforcement?
Right.
But you can't ask the questions of like, hey, are you a fan of CSI? I mean, maybe they ask those questions,
right?
But it will affect the way in which you judge, not necessarily the person, but the process and procedures that law enforcement conduct. Because we all think we're experts because we're watching CSI. And we know that you just submit some of this stuff, it comes back in a half an hour.
Right.
That is not necessarily the case.
Well, and something else, it's interesting because Gary and I are starting to take the beat and the badge, and we're trying to put it into presentation mode for schools to kind of talk to parents and things like that. And it was interesting because we met with a local school district here in Connecticut recently. And one of the things that we focus a lot on, which you thankfully, as you listen and give us feedback, something that a lot of people have said has been the most striking conversation where the kind of knows, talking about the misconceptions around stranger danger. And it's funny because the superintendent admitted that we still have this perception in our mind that stranger danger is the boogeyman coming out of the woods. Right. And what's funny is a lot of times in these crime shows, that's exactly what it is. The crime is just kind of like, whoa, this random person just targeted. And that doesn't even mirror the crimes that we do see in America. Usually, I mean, stranger danger is not the same as what it used to be. It happens, right? The random car that pulls up and targets a random kid. The mysterious
white van that everybody's looking for.
But the majority of those cases are people who are actually familiar to your kids. So even the way that we perceive crimes on television, I don't think always mirror, at least that's my standpoint. That's one thing that stands out to me, and I'm not a cop.
No, you're right. I mean,
well, thank you. I like when I'm right. It's good.
Yes,
I love that.
You are right. So, but I think you're right because it's drama. So you can't have I keep using this word. The second time I'm going to use it today is this humdrum kind of mode of like, sometimes crime and police work is not sexy. Right. It's really, really important.
Right, but it's true.
But it has to be sexy to people. So you're right. And people start to focus and get concerned about these high-profile crimes when really we want them to encourage people to look at crime prevention in that kind of way. But it does affect people. We talked about jurors. It affects jurors. It affects the community because the community can't understand why, hey, if one person solves this crime, why do we have all these cops here? Why do we need all the cops here?
Or when you see all the cops, why haven't they figured it out sooner?
That's right.
That's it, right? You have the opposite effect too. What are we paying for all these guys to be standing around?
So it affects the public, the way they perceive law enforcement. Because if they look at their police department saying, why can't they solve this? They think they're inadequate or they're not trained or somehow we need to bring in the FBI or why is the FBI? We saw that with the case in Arizona, the Guthrie case.
Yes, of course.
The challenges of that and the discussions around the Guthrie case in Arizona that's being investigated, they still don't have a lot of information on it. Yeah. So it's like, is the FBI in charge? Is the local sheriff in charge? Why did the FBI take so long?
Right.
Because they're perceiving it to be the way that it is on TV.
A TV show. Now, okay, so here's my question to you, Gary, which is, what's the good side? Is there a good side to crime shows and crime movies?
Yeah, I think there are some good things. I'll tell you one that's really important.
Yeah.
That I think is so important is crime shows have a way now to go towards highlighting the individual people. Like the bad thing about it is they think it's just one or two people that are doing it. The good thing about some of these shows is they start to highlight the human side of public safety, the law enforcement police officers themselves, the challenges, the stress of coming home. Some of them even do a good job of depicting alcoholism in law enforcement. And, look, that's a problem for a lot of people. But the stresses of the job, how it affects their personal life and the personal, it shows that actually the uniform is just, behind the uniform is a person.
Right.
And that's really probably one of the good things that it shows. The other things that it could show is when you start talking about funding of law enforcement and technology, how technology does help solve crimes. It takes a lot of effort, but it will show taxpayers or others in the community why this technology can be very helpful.
Yeah. Well, and to your point about kind of like giving the human element of a cop, especially in today's world where it is just so divided and just how people view them. The one thing I think is also great, at least from my perspective, is I think shows are doing more to talk about PTSD. which
Yes.
we've always said is just kind of a military thing.
Right.
But I think it's becoming more and more prevalent that cops go home and they don't clock out. So
Right.
they might be
Yes.
done with the case and they might have wrapped it up and whatever, but they still saw things that most of us don't see. They still had conversations that they can't even share with their loved ones when they go home. And there's just so much that they still carry, to your point about the human element.
You know, I was just thinking about it. One of the things we should start to look at as we look at going to the schools is really holding some community conversations on debunking the myth, because it's really important. Because if you think about it, the positives, okay, but here's some of the negatives. Victims. Victims will look at, if they become a victim, they'll look at how other victims reacted to it, and they might not come forward because of whatever a variety of reasons.
True.
So it's really important that we hold these series of things of let's take shows and debunk where they're at. And then the important part of having the community come forward and say, because this is such a huge problem. You coined the phrase, the CSI effect. It does. It matters in the way in which we do our job. But victims may not come forward, or they may come forward as a result of some of these crimes. So jurors are affected, cops are affected, cops' family members are affected, because it changes our perception, and it's one-sided, and it's always successful.
Right. And I think ultimately what we learned in this episode is that basically you should stop watching all the crime shows, at least completely, and you should just listen to The Beat and the Badge. That's what I learned. I'm going to break the fourth wall again. I think that's what we should do together. Yes, I agree. Yes, all of you. Yes. Gary, sorry.
We all got it. I think that I think we'll continue, and you and I will continue to watch these crime shows, but watch them with an understanding that sometimes crimes and challenges and things that happen in Hollywood are not necessarily the things that are happening in our community, and the way in which they're solved are not necessarily solved in a 45-minute episode of your favorite show.